Hello and welcome. We're going to get started in just a minute. As we're waiting for folks to join, if you want to go ahead and say hello or where you're joining us from. Hello again to everybody who's joining us. If you want to say hello in the chat box, share where you're joining us from. Great, we have folks from Pittsburgh, Chicago, Dallas. Any West Coast people? New York, oh, Hawaii, hello from Hawaii. Aloha. Well, hello again to everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. Your phone line is muted. Please use the Q&A box if you have any questions during our webinar. Welcome again. My name is Leslie Gabay-Swanston. I'm the Director of Program and Systems Quality at the National Summer Learning Association. Here's a quick overview of our webinar today. I'm going to share a little bit about NSLA and what we do here. Then we'll hear from our guest speakers. We'll have some time for questions and answers before we wrap up with some announcements. As I said before, if you have any questions while we're going along, please use the Q&A box. We'll try to keep an eye on the chat box as well, but your questions might get lost in there. So if you want them to be asked live, please use the Q&A box. So a little bit about NSLA. The National Summer Learning Association is the only national nonprofit exclusively focused on closing the achievement gap by increasing access to high-quality summer learning opportunities. NSLA's goal is to increase nationwide the number of high-quality summer learning programs designed to close the achievement gap. To achieve this, NSLA recognizes and disseminates what works, offers expertise and support for programs and communities, and advocates for summer learning as a solution for equity and excellence in education. NSLA's work is driven by the belief that all children and youth deserve high-quality summer learning experiences that will help them succeed in college, career, and life. Core to our work is the recognition that high-quality summer learning works. High-quality summer learning programs have been shown to improve reading and math skills, school attachment, motivation, and relationships with adults and peers. So why do we believe so strongly in summer? We know that summer is a time of great inequity for young people, and we believe that promoting and supporting summer opportunities is a way to address this. This goes beyond the summer learning that's in our name. We also want to see programs and communities addressing access to other resources like meals. Summer is a time for innovation and exploration. Without some of the constraints of the school year, kids are able to try different ways of learning, interact with other adults and peers that they might not otherwise. And it's also time for innovation for adults, whether that's opportunities for professional development, trying out new teaching methods, or exploring new partnerships. So now I want to introduce our guest speakers for today. Christine Baines oversees BellXcel's professional learning and quality improvement, ensuring high-quality summer and after-school experiences for scholars and educators. She has significant experience in developing and delivering professional learning experiences for youth development professionals and school leaderships. Brian Hall serves as Senior Director of Evaluation for BellXcel. He has been a leader in the summer learning evaluation field for 10 years. So with that, I will hand things over to Brian.
Greetings, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Brian Hall, and I'm Senior Director of Evaluation at BellXcel, and I'll be leading the first set of slides here as we go through our presentation. And the title of our presentation today, this webinar, is Expanding Teacher Practice. Just real quick, just to go through a couple of objectives we've set up for you. Sorry here, these slides advance quicker than I think I let them here. Oh boy. Sorry, these slides are advancing quicker than I thought here. Okay. We skipped a few slides here just because it sort of went forward without going. Here we go. Thank you. There we go. Whoever's controlling that, thank you. Just a few objectives here as we jump into this presentation. By the end of the session, we hope you'll be able to learn about BellXcel's approach to summer learning. You'll be able to review the research related to educator outcomes and impact. And we hope you'll be able to deepen the understanding of how to use summer as a learning lab and incubator for SEL skill development. This is a brief overview of our BellXcel powered programs. Our evidence-based program focuses on 4 key areas for holistic approach to each day of the program. Those 4 key areas are wellness, academics, culture, and family engagement. We don't have a lot of time today to dive too deep into our BellXcel powered programs, but if you are interested in learning more about our organization, please feel free to either email us after this presentation or go to our website. Our website is bellxcel.org, and BellXcel is as you see in the corner, BellXcel.org. Before we dive into talking about teacher development, I wanted to take us back a few years and tell you a little bit about why BellXcel started to become interested in and focused on expanding teacher practice. Like all summer learning programs, BellXcel has always considered the youth in our programs to be our primary participants. Our mission, our program deliverables, and our evaluation outcomes have always focused exclusively on the impact the academics and the social emotional skill development has on our young people. Now, if you've ever dabbled in the world of program evaluation, you know what a logic model is. So from a logic model perspective, the staff in our program and the professional development that they receive both before and during the program have always just been considered inputs into the process of impacting our youth. But in the summer of 2016, we began to hear evidence of summer teaching practices being transferred to the new school year. BellXcel started hearing anecdotal evidence saying that summer staff were continuing to use their summer practices and approaches during the school year. We also did a deep dive into our internal end of program staff survey looking at open-ended responses and discovered that staff were discussing the value of summer professional development in their teaching experiences, how it would be useful during the school year. And this data, it led us to a new theory, that staff are also, in addition to the youth, participants in a summer intervention. They learn and practice new and/or enhanced teaching practices that they can transfer to and transform school year teaching practice. To explore this new theory, BellXcel conducted 2 separate research initiatives between 2016 and 2018. We started administering a fall follow-up survey with staff who worked in our summer program about 2 to 3 months into the new school year to gauge if summer professional development and practices were impacting school year knowledge, confidence, and practice. Additionally, we partnered with an outside independent research firm to conduct some focus group research with staff working for a new summer partner. They interviewed 17 summer staff during the following school year to explore if and how the transfer of summer strategies was occurring. Last year, we partnered with a major independent research organization to conduct a larger and more rigorous study of our theory around the power of summer impact to impact school year teaching practice. This study is currently in progress as we speak and is expected to end in June of this year. The research activities of this study include a review of our summer professional development model and activities to ensure it meets best practices in the field of adult learning. It included case study site visits and focus groups during the pre-service training and during the program. This happened last summer during summer 2019. It's included 2 rounds of staff survey research, both at the end of the program in 2019 and during the fall of 2019, and additional survey research with non-BellXcel teachers as part of a national panel survey that the research party administers. We do have some early findings from all of this research. This includes that the transfer of new and/or enhanced skills to the school year does happen. That includes increased knowledge, increased confidence, increased abilities. Educators report that the transfer and transformation is strongest in growth mindset, positive behavior management, and student voice and choice. Summer provides a lot of opportunities to try new things, namely the opportunity to experiment, to teach outside of school system expectations, and that both of these enable the transfer and transformation of these strategies to the school year. And lastly, that school year and district contextual factors can limit transfer and transformation. For example, co-teacher between an academic and assistant teacher is part of the BellXcel Summer model, but during the school year, not all classrooms have 2 teachers, thereby limiting opportunities for collaboration. Studies have shown that adults who can recognize, understand, label, and express and regulate their emotions can have impact. That teachers demonstrate higher levels of patience and empathy. They encourage healthy communication and create safe learning environments. That they can build and maintain stronger relationships with their students, which leads to improved classroom management and have fewer discipline problems. They can more effectively teach and model social emotional competence for their students. And then they can positively contribute to the school's overall climate. I am now going to hand it over to Christine, who will walk us through the rest of this presentation.
Thank you, Brian, and hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. What I'm going to spend some time going through is how exactly BellXcel has been able to use summer and after school learning as that incubator to do the things that Brian just described. How are we able to build knowledge and confidence? How are teachers able to try new things? How are we then, how does that then result in what Brian just went over, creating a safe environment, improving the culture, strengthening classroom management? And these are all things that we see in our programs throughout the summer as well as in the after school space. And so as you see, BellXcel is very much grounded in data. So what we'll go over right now is actually based on a resource found on CASEL's website. And so on the CASEL's website, there is a resource called District Resource Center. And this research center is a partnership with districts representing 1 million or more students across the United States. And based on these efforts to study the scale of social emotional learning, the District Resource Center provides a framework to support high-quality systemic SEL implementation. And what you see here is that framework that focuses on specific key activities that contribute to a strengthened SEL approach, not only in school districts, but also in the out-of-school time space. This process was intended to embed SEL into every aspect of a district's work and students' educational experiences. Successful implementation can follow multiple paths. However, there are 16 key activities that the district framework has laid out on the essential district actions for implementing SEL. And we're going to focus on some key actions that BellXcel has championed and has worked really hard to fine-tune throughout our program models that we have found contribute to not only scholar SEL development, but more so adult SEL development. So we're primarily focusing on focus area 2, which is strengthening adult SEL cultural competencies. And within this focus area, they identify 4 key activities to foster a staff community that cultivates adult professionals, social, emotional, and cultural competencies. So this is focus area 2 that we're going to dive into now. And I do have a resource, there is a resource linked at the end of this PowerPoint deck. If you want to explore this district resource center, I encourage you to, because there's lots of great stuff there. And so as I said, we're focusing on this second focus area 2, which is adult SEL and cultural competence. The first key activity here is the strengthening of central office staff. And so we all know that it's a very collaborative effort in everything that we do working with scholars and families, but many times it does begin with the leadership, which is that central office staff. And so when working in an out-of-school time space, we may not necessarily have a traditional central office staff. And so at BellXcel, we've identified this central office staff as program leaders. And these are the folks for us who are key decision makers and key funders, folks that are making the funding happening to support programming. And so to engage our program leaders in developing their awareness and strengthen their SEL competencies, we do a number of things. First thing we do is, well, just also so that you know, they typically do not directly engage with scholars or with instructors. They're more hands-off, but they definitely have a huge impact in decision-making when it comes to summer and after-school programs. And so this begins with training. So our program leaders engage in training that is in person, on demand, or live. We really have made it a point to make that training very flexible so that it can be made available no matter how that person needs to engage, in person, on demand, or live. And so through this training, it provides a framework overview for our systemic SEL learning, including our 5 core SEL competencies that we're going to go over later, plus growth mindset. And in that training, we discuss how to reinforce these competencies not only within the program itself, but across districts, schools, within communities, and even at home. We also provide access to our social emotional training via Sanford Harmony curriculum. So at BellXcel, we have a very comprehensive and holistic approach to summer and after school learning. However, we partner with many other vendors and curriculum providers to bolster our approach to out-of-school time learning. And one of those providers is the curriculum Sanford Harmony. And so while our central office staff, using air quotes here, are not directly engaging with scholars, they still are aware of and receive training on this curriculum so that they can then speak to funders and speak to other individuals in leadership roles about the SEL curriculum that scholars are engaged in. And finally, resources and training videos are also available for use. So while we may provide that training, our central office staff folks and everyone has access to training if they want to refresh and dive deeper, and even to onboard staff that might be hired later on in the summer. As we know, there may be some transitions or transiency that happens. These trainings are made available to make sure that that shared language and the norms around the expectations for program, but also the SEL expectations are communicated in a very consistent way, no matter who is being hired and at what point in the year. Additionally, we also review instructional and cultural approaches used to foster SEL and detail the impact of SEL on academic behavior and life outcomes. Our training will also outline how SEL supports education, equity, and inclusive learning environments, and how it then supports BellXcel program overall vision and goals. And so the greatest takeaway here is that even with folks who are not directly engaging with scholars and directly engaging with families, they still receive a deeper understanding of an SEL approach so that they can then model the SEL competencies in their own work and throughout their life. The next key key activity is professional learning. Ongoing social emotional learning, professional learning is offered throughout all of BellXcel program implementation. At the beginning of implementation, initial professional learning helps build awareness and foundational knowledge. Beyond that introduction to SEL, ongoing scaffolded SEL professional learning is offered to help ensure SEL remains central, both to program sites within the program as a whole, as well as within individual classrooms. Additionally, those who lead implementation or work closely with students receive additional coaching and technical assistance that provides deep, real-time implementation support. And so what I've described there are the many layers of intentional SEL support that's provided to adults within the program. And keep in mind that when we're training on SEL at BellXcel, it's two-pronged. One approach is preparing educators to build those competencies in scholars throughout the program. But the other approach is to develop those competencies in teachers. And that's done in a number of ways. So in the training, there are activities and reflection that's embedded to get teachers and adults thinking about what this looks like in practice, and then also to apply and think about how to apply that when working with scholars. Instructional coaches, an instructional coach is a role that's unique and distinct to BellXcel's model. In this role, the instructional coach will conduct daily observations for looking at academic instruction, enrichment instruction, but also observing for social emotional competency development in scholars, as well as potentially in adults as well. And not only does that, those conversations and those observations don't fall flat. It should follow up with a debrief or coaching conversation that instructional coach leads. And with coaching, that could really be guided by the teacher identifying the areas that he or she wants to develop in, and that coach working one-on-one to build and to scaffold the approach based on the identified need that teacher has expressed. With coaching and technical assistance, now zooming out a bit more, our program leaders, who again, the central office staff or folks that are the program directors or program managers, they work directly with BellXcel Partner Success Leads who provide coaching and technical assistance. So with technical assistance, that's more so with ensuring that the program is implemented to fidelity, and that the partner has everything they need to be successful throughout the summer. But coaching is a bit different, because with coaching, the program leader would identify particular areas that he or she wants to develop, and similar to what the instructional coach does, but on a programmatic level. This can also be individual development of that program leader. If they've identified an SEL competency that they want to develop, or maybe something programmatically, our BellXcel Partner Success Lead will support in coaching them to reach the goals that they've identified. And finally, professional learning also takes place throughout the program cycle through staff meetings and professional development that's led by program managers. And the greatest examples of staff-led PD is when it's not just strictly about improving the program, but also focused on professional development of the adult. How are they developing in their profession? How are they achieving SEL competencies? How are they growing in thear practice? And so many of BellXcel provides templates and resources to support our program leaders in leading true quality staff meetings. Next, let's talk about strengthening adult social, emotional, and cultural competency. And we're going to spend a good amount of time here, because this is where the magic really happens when we are strengthening the SEL competencies and cultural competencies. And I find that the magic happens here because if you're truly intentional about strengthening these competencies, there's really so many ways to go about doing this within the program cycle. And BellXcel has done a really great job of doing this in so many different ways. So starting with just generally speaking, and before I do speak generally, I'd like us to just ground ourselves in the definition of social emotional learning. It is the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. Cultural competency is the ability to examine the various social and cultural identities of oneself and others, understand and appreciate diversity from a historically grounded and strength-focused lens, recognize and respond to cultural demands and opportunities, and build relationships from across cultural backgrounds. So as we go into these next few slides, keep those definitions in mind, because those are the goals. That's what we're trying to accomplish through the next actions we'll go through. And what I really love about speaking about SEL from this adult perspective is that, many times in what I've observed in many after school and summer programs is that as educators and folks who work with children, we're really great at championing and building and developing these skills in scholars, but it's equally as important to develop those in adults, because the modeling that we provide, the interactions that we have will be even stronger when we develop those competencies within ourselves. And I know from personally, I struggle with this at times, especially with my husband, but I'm always practicing growth mindset. It'll continue to improve. So at BellXcel, some ways that we do this holistically. One is through community time. And this is a very 15 minutes that's carved out into every single day of programming. The first 15 minutes of programming, 15 to 20 minutes, where scholars engage in a routine that's a fun, uplifting, and shared experience that celebrates scholars, that practices social emotional competencies, that is a space for scholars to have fun, but it's also a space for our adults to practice their social emotional competencies as well. And so community time follows a very structured approach, and this can look different from site to site, but all sites know that 15 minutes is community time. We're building social emotional connections and bonds in those 15 to 20 minutes at the beginning of programming. And so no matter which site or program you'll go to, you'll see community time during those first 15 to 20 minutes, and you'll hear scholars laughing and teachers laughing and having fun with each other, scholars and adults alike. Also, these practices that support these competencies are embedded in trainings and staff meetings, as I said earlier. We also provide our program leaders and the staff that work with scholars access to self-reflection and personal assessment tools. And this has nothing to do with scholars. These are tools that allow adults to identify, where am I with as it relates to self-awareness? What about self-management? What about self-regulation? And to identify where they lie on that spectrum, and then to set goals, taking it a step further, to set goals to determine how they can grow in that competency, because we know it's a journey. It's not something that happens overnight, but providing that tool and allowing for self-reflection many times can be the first step. Next, we intentionally plan support provided to staff and reflecting on their own emotional competency. So using that self-reflection tool and intentionally having time for planning to complete that tool and then reflect and then create those action steps is something that occurs in many of our programs. Now we're going to go competency by competency to identify what BellXcel does as it relates to each individual competency. So what you see here is an image of a kindness wall. You throw it like confetti. And so this is important because self-awareness is the ability to accurately recognize one's own emotions, thoughts, and values and how they influence behavior. And so awareness can come in the form of being aware of your own, of course, self-awareness, being aware of your own emotions, thoughts, and values, but also checking in with others as well. And so what you see here is an example of how many of our program leaders incorporate check-in rituals to begin meetings, and then by also setting intentions for engagement and returning to them at the end of the meeting. And so having that ability to set that intention for the check-in at the beginning of the meeting, individually checking in with yourself. How are you doing right now? How are you feeling right now on this day, in this moment, as we go into this, day 3 of programming, but allowing that space and time for staff members to check in with themselves and to share that in this confetti wall. And then also circling back at the end of the day to doing another temperature check with how you're feeling. Another way is to provide opportunities for staff to share out positive praise with each other as well. Self-management is the ability to successfully regulate one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations, effectively managing stress to control one's emotions. What you see here is an example of an exercise that's included in a BellXcel professional development or training. And this is a self-care matrix, because it's so important that, well, what we recognize is that it's very important to show up as your best self every day, but that really does require prioritizing self-care. I am a former classroom teacher and have spent my entire career working with students and youth and in education. And I have personally experienced the feeling of being depleted and emotionally drained, physically drained, when I just gave every waking hour to my career. And so intentionally identifying, how will I practice self-care mentally? What will I do physically? What about spiritually? Who can support me professionally and in my personal life? And then what do I want to accomplish this year or this summer? So through our training, we allow our participants and provide a space for them to reflect on how they will practice self-care and manage those emotions so that they can show up as their best self every summer. One thing that I've seen done before is when one of our program staff in one of our programs, she was very adamant about her scholars recognizing that she was human too. She said it was a very small community school, so she would oftentimes see her scholars outside of school, outside of the summer, and it was like seeing a ghost. They were like, wow, you live here too? So she was very big on having scholars recognize that she was human. So whenever she experienced a very strong reaction in her classroom with scholars, she made it a point to show how to regulate and manage her emotions in a responsible way, but making sure that scholars could see her doing that. And so when she was getting very angry or frustrated or having an emotional reaction, she would practice her own calm down routine, which is she would put on slippers, bedroom slippers, step outside of the classroom, and then slow down. So it's the 3 S's: slippers, step outside, and slow down. So her scholars were aware, okay, this teacher is stepping out, she needs a moment, and she'll be back. And so through the practice of displaying how to manage and regulate emotions, her scholars, she was hoping, would then be able to identify that they too can model those behaviors of self-regulation and management as she did. Next, let's talk about social awareness. Social awareness is the ability to take the perspectives of others, including those from diverse backgrounds, into account. And so through our BellXcel programs, we normalize protocols that allow colleagues to give feedback to one another, build shared agreements to ensure feedback is constructive and well received. In most of our programs, you'll see that our programs engage in observations of classroom observations, as I mentioned earlier, but in some programs, there are peer observations, which is then again heightening social awareness. And so through peer observations, this is when one teacher would observe another classroom and vice versa, and they would use this observation tool. And this protocol would allow colleagues to give feedback to one another, build shared agreements for how they want to communicate with one another, the best way that they'd like to receive feedback, and also have like a productive and constructive debate and set goals for the next visit, which then attributes to them building the muscle of social awareness. Relationship skills are the ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships with diverse individuals and groups. BellXcel programs build in regular outlets for staff to get to know one another about their lives and the lives of their colleagues, both within program and outside of program. Many of our programs organize social events that are appealing to all, and these occur during pre-program meetings, during community time, family engagement events, staff meetings, and social gatherings. So what you see here is an image from one of our programs in the Mid-Atlantic. Actually, all these images are taken from real BellXcel programs, but this one is a program for our Mid-Atlantic team who holds frequent social outings. And through these social outings, you can imagine it's just a fun time to unwind, but also a time for every adult to connect, even with folks you may not connect with every single day, because some of our programs have over 20 plus staff members. And so imagining the time constraints and the time that you're spent in program between working with scholars and lesson planning, there might not be a time also to have a meaningful conversation. And so these staff outings do provide an opportunity to build relationships. And what's great about this team in particular is that not only do they have these staff outings, but they also incorporate competitions, games, and conversation starters, ways to connect with folks. So this image on the left, you would have seen a table, a centerpiece with sentence stems or question stems to have folks engage in conversations to deepen their connection and get to know each other on a more personal level. We also, what you see here are some quotes from our teachers after our, as it relates to relationship skills. And so these quotes, as you can read them on your own, show that many of our teachers value the displays of teamwork and collaboration among staff and with scholars. And so what I have found is that the effective collaboration and intentionally making time for collaboration, whether it is the peer observations or the community outings or whatever it might be, but those seem, from what we have found in our data from these evaluation surveys, is that folks really enjoy the opportunity to work together in a display of teamwork and collaboration. Responsible decision-making. Let me just get my notes here. Responsible decision-making is the ability to make constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions based on ethical standards, safety concerns, and norms. BellXcel programs promote responsible decision-making by analyzing problems and data together, disaggregating data, and having courageous conversations about disparities. Many times, these conversations take place during STAR data and behavior chats. STAR assessment is an assessment that's given to all scholars in BellXcel programs, and the data is used to inform instruction. So once the data is compiled, the instructional coach and academic teacher meet to analyze and make data-driven instructional and behavioral decisions. And so these decisions are based on data, but they are responsible decisions because they are made collaboratively and consider the ethical, safety, and social norms, as well as the academic abilities of scholars. And the same is true when making decisions about what scholars will engage in throughout the summer. At BellXcel, we're very big advocates for scholar voice and choice and collaboration between teachers. We have a very specific teacher collaboration model. And so we know with collaboration comes responsible decision-making. And while we leave it up to the discretion of the individuals who are collaborating, how they will make those decisions responsibly, our model does suggest that folks do work together to make decisions. It's not just an individual. And even the same is said for our program leaders, our instructional coach, as well as the program manager. Many times are making decisions on the behavior management plan, the observation plan. A lot of planning happens collaboratively to make decisions that will impact the entire program. And again, you see quotes here that show you how much our program leaders and staff, how they feel about responsible decision-making. So working together to observe teachers and using data to drive instruction for STAR assessments. So I'll give you a moment to read over that as well. Our final competency that we'll focus on is growth mindset. And in a growth mindset, people believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. Brains and talent are just the starting point. And so at BellXcel, this is one focus that we teach our scholars, that their brain is a muscle and they can grow, but we also encourage our teachers and our adults to believe this as well. This image is from a BellXcel Summer training and shows how during this meeting, program leaders and instructors reflect on their own personal growth mindset and how to continue a spirit of growth mindset throughout the program cycle. And this image came as a result of a training in which growth mindset was embedded throughout. It wasn't something that was statically taught in a PowerPoint, but the language and the tenets and ideas behind growth mindset is one that we want our teachers to believe that in this summer program, you can grow, you can apply new things that can then transfer into the school year or into your job outside of the summer. And so we spend a lot of time talking about what BellXcel does, but I'm sure we have some experts on the line as well, folks who are already doing this work in strengthening adult SEL in your summer program. So I'd like to hear from you. What do you already do to strengthen SEL development in your program? So let's take a moment based on what we just described here, based on Castle's framework that we looked at, looking at the different SEL competencies. You can type your response in the chat box, or maybe you can unmute yourself, not quite sure, to share what do you do as it relates to strengthening adult SEL development. And Leslie, I can't see the chat box, but if anything comes in, please let me know.
I will, yes. Yeah, so I don't think we can unmute people, but if you do want to share your thoughts in either the chat box or the Q&A box, feel free.
So as some responses are coming in there, I also encourage you to reflect on these next two questions. What can you do immediately? We've gone over some ways that BellXcel does this. Some take planning, but you know, the good thing is we do have a runway. Summer begins in a couple of months. So there are some things that you can do immediately to begin planning to develop SEL competencies in adults. And then what can you implement in the long term to build SEL competencies in adults? Maybe there's a long-term goal that you have that you'd like to really define, set goals against, measure, that will be developed over time, similar to what Brian described at the beginning of our time together. There is still time to do these things. As Brian shared, we have found that our teachers are applying these great skills and concepts throughout the school year. And so we hope that you will also make time to plan and prioritize SEL development in adults this summer as well. Did any responses come in, Leslie?
Not yet. Maybe people are still writing their responses.
Okay.
We'll also have some time during our Q&A.
Awesome. And so with that, we're at the end of my presentation, Brian and I presentation. So if you would like to see those resources, I have put the link there. It's a short one you can visit. There's lots of great resources that I pulled from for this presentation. And then we do have a brief 5-minute exit ticket. We'd love your feedback about the webinar that you've attended today. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Brian and Christine. So we have some time now for questions and answers. If you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to go ahead and type those into the Q&A box. As we said before, if you have anything that you want to share about the work that you're currently doing, go ahead and feel free to type those in as well. So we have a question. Outside of engaging a third party, do you have ideas around pre-post evaluation for teachers, such as how to implement questions to ask to evaluate the confidence, a growth mindset, etc.?
Brian, I think you might have some good ideas about that.
Sure. I'm just looking at this question again, and just sort
I
of
can read it
thinking
one more
about
time.
this. I mean, there's definitely lots of ways to do this. You know, you definitely don't need a third party for it. Surveying teachers can be pretty straightforward. You know, we do it using online surveys. We use SurveyMonkey. As long as you get their contact information and their email address, it's something that can be easy to do. So the methods for doing it, the avenues for doing it can be fairly straightforward and user-friendly for even small, you know, providers who definitely don't want to try to engage a third party, and it's something that you don't necessarily need to do. The methods for doing it can be straightforward, and again, it can be online works very well if you have access to email addresses, if you want to put surveys online. Even paper surveys work really well too, because you can sometimes, and I think BellXcel used to do this many years ago. We don't do it anymore just because the scale of our programs have grown so big, and the access to teachers can be kind of difficult. But whether you do it online or whether it's paper, you can administer a survey. For example, you know, at the hiring process, for example, once you sort of brought them on board, you can offer the survey there, or you can offer the survey to them, say at the beginning of a training, before they even get the training, you can offer the survey then. And then the post side of that would be either when the training's over or when the program's over. There's a variety of different time points that one can explore depending on sort of your research questions. So I think this is a really, really interesting question in terms of sort of like evaluating sort of confidence and growth mindset. It's a tricky one too. You want to make sure you get your question right, because it can sometimes, when you sort of ask questions, you just want to make sure that you're not asking it in a way that it leads teachers to sort of provide an answer that they think that you're looking for, or you want to ask it in a way that allows them to give sort of an authentic answer, or sort of a real answer, versus one that's maybe a socially acceptable answer, or an answer that's one that they might not necessarily be sort of as honest about. So again, that's sort of the sort of short way of answering that question. It's an interesting one, and one I think that can be useful to understanding the impact of sort of building SEL skills in staff.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So we have a couple other questions coming in. Before I get to those, just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides will be shared later. Also, the exit survey that Christine mentioned will come up automatically after the webinar ends. I'm also going to add it to the chat box if you wanted to click on that. Next question we have, are there sites that do the community time as an entire site or just by classroom?
That's a great question. So it can be both. So some sites do whole group community time, some do by classroom, some do both. It depends on the availability of space, depends on the desires of that program. But I mean, I can tell you some of the benefits of both. Doing it whole group, if you have mixed grades, if let's say you have a K through 5, all scholars are together, they're getting to practice those competencies together, getting to interact with students that are not in their regular classroom, and getting to interact with teachers who they may not interact with. But again, when I do see that it's in a broken down space, it might also be because of the grade levels. It might not be developmentally appropriate for a kindergartner to do the same activity as a 5th grader in that community time space. And then within the small group, I've seen that happen as well. And that's more intimate. It still could follow the same structure, maybe even doing something that relates to that classroom. So it really would depend on the desires of that program leader and of that culture in that space as well.
Okay, thanks. We have a question about making time to have all this happen. How are you able to, in practice, make time for all of this to happen with your staff during the actual program day? It's amazing, but summer flies by, and there's so much teachers are juggling. It seems like all of it on top of academic and other priorities would be overwhelming.
Yes, I do agree that, it is, summer does fly. It really, really goes by very fast. But a lot of what I've discussed are, it's not its own, many of this is not standalone. It can be happening during academic time. It can be happening while other things are occurring. So, so that's what we focus on is finding a way to integrate everything through intentional planning. And so take community time, for example. That 15 minutes of designated community time, that could be the most intentional moments of adult SEL practice that happens throughout the day. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's the pre-program meeting that you do. You say, okay, we're going to focus on this competency. We're going to spend 2 minutes having a conversation about it, and that's it. So as I talked and pulled these different examples, many of them, they might not be happening at one site all summer, but it's the nuggets and the 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there, after work activity that makes it come to life. So I would say it's about prioritizing what is realistic for your program, what is your focus, and then going from there. Maybe it starts with that self-reflection tool and just allowing that to be the starting place for this summer. Is we're going to reflect, you identify, and in your lesson plan, maybe identify how you're going to practice intentional adult competency development for yourself. So it's a matter of deciding what works best for you and not, eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Thanks. So this might be the idea of incorporating this might be a big culture shift for some programs and staff. So as you're working with programs on professional development and going through some of these key activities that you've mentioned, what are some of the concepts or strategies that you see folks struggling with the most? Did I lose you, Christine? Again, if you have a question for our panelists, feel free to type it into the Q&A box. So I'm going to repeat that last question. As you're working with programs, what are some of the concepts or strategies that you see people struggling with, particularly with those key activities?
Sorry about that dead silence. So the last question actually is one that I've heard before about, like, how do we do it all? It goes by so fast. How do we make this a really strong and awesome program, and incorporating everything that we know is what's best for adults and for scholars? And so, like you were saying, that mindset shift of identifying how to take the best practices and parsing it down to what's best for your program model. And what is great about that is that we have so much time until summer. I know it might not feel like that. I feel like summer has already started, but identifying like a time where it's backwards planning, setting goals now so that you can successfully implement. And so it is that notion of how do we fit it all in? For many of our beginning sites, we might not even broach the topic of adult SEL in year one. We might focus on self-reflection. That's year one. We're just going to use this self-reflection tool to become and also an awareness of these competencies across our sites. That's year one. Year two, okay, now we've got the hang of it. We know what it is. Now we're going to start building upon self-awareness and doing some intentional practices there. So I would say just incremental changes, shifting the culture through the small steps that are taken, that starts with the program leader. And so again, I would hope that you all take a look at the Castle District Center resources, because it lays out not only the tasks and the activities, but also great resources and tools to support you in doing this in a very realistic and applicable way.
Perfect, thank you. It looks like that might be all the questions that we have for today. I want to thank our panelists, Christina and Brian, again for joining us. I'm going to wrap up just a couple of announcements. First is National Summer Learning Day is coming up. It's going to be July 6th through the 11th. This is a day to celebrate the importance of summer, and we encourage people to hold an event, invite your local elected officials, just make sure that everybody is aware of how important summer is, and you can share your event or your summer program, information about your event or summer program on our event tracker. Again, the main week for Summer Learning Week is July 6th through the 11th. We encourage people to celebrate any time during the summer. Our annual national conference will be happening November 16th through the 18th in Washington, D.C. this year. Early bird registration is up and open on our website, and look out for more information coming soon on our pre-conference sessions and workshops. Speaking of which, if you are not following us on social media, be sure to follow us on Twitter or Facebook or any of our social media to keep up to date on the latest announcements about resources and events. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. Again, that exit survey will pop up after we end the webinar. Be sure to complete that. Bye for now. Have a great day.